Yesterday I thought I knew what mattered. Keeping the house standing, keeping the list checked, keeping my chin up so no one would worry. Then my grandson rang my bell with a small paper-wrapped box, and a look in his eyes that didn't belong to a child anymore. He opened his mouth, said 12 words I'll never forget, and the ground I'd kept so steady under my feet shifted beautifully. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. What city do you call home? I like to picture your streets as I talk, the way evening sits on your porches, and the way your coffee tastes in the morning. It was one of those late afternoons that feels like the house is exhaling. Shadows of my maple tree crawled across the kitchen floor in tall, patient stripes. I had a kettle on and the radio low. A bald day murmuring like polite company in the living room. The porch screen clicked every now and then in the breeze. I was halfway through arguing with a stiff jar lid when a familiar knock, 2 quick taps, a pause, then one more came at the back door. Lon Min called. He always says my name like it's still new to him, even though we've lived 3 doors apart for 30 years. Min is the sort of man the world once depended on for punctual mail, perfect lawns, and a toolbox that never quite closes. He stepped in with a crate of screws I never asked for, and a grin I didn't think I needed. Heard your porch step is threatening to unionize. You heard correctly, I said, tapping the lid with a knife. Coffee always, he said in a voice that made the word feel like a promise. He set the crate down, glanced at the game score, and went to the back step the way a man goes back to a sentence he didn't finish. I like the house best when someone else is in it. It reminds me I'm still here, not just keeping a museum of my own days. I poured 2 mugs, slid one onto the counter's soft, worn ring where my late husband used to set his cup, and caught my breath the way I often do. Grief is a polite tenant in old houses. It learns where the creaky boards are and steps lightly most days, only to wake you up sometimes with a noise you can't place. Min called out that the step had all the patience of a cat. I told him to be gentle with it. We laughed and then another knock came at the back door. Quicker, lighter, a trill I know in my bones. Grandma. Khan burst in before I could answer. 10.5 in years and in mood somewhere between astronaut and lab puppy. He had a denim jacket on, though it was too worn for it, and there was a square bulge in his pocket that looked like it had been hiding there for days rehearsing. Well, if it isn't trouble disguised as family, I said. Min straightened up in the doorway, hat pushed back, cheeks dusted with sawdust. Hey champ. Hey Mr. C. Khan said, not taking his eyes off me. He stood there, rocking on his heels like the words he needed were arranged in the air, just out of reach. Grandma, I brought you something. Oh. I leaned on the counter, pretending not to notice the way his mouth went serious. The way his fingers pressed into the denim fabric like it could anchor him. What's the occasion? Because it's Tuesday, he said, as if that were explanation enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. The kind of wrap a kid makes when he's decided neatness matters, then lives with the fact that corners have opinions. He set it on the table like it might bruise. For me? I asked softer. For you, he said. But like it's more than the thing I want to say. Min took one respectful step back the way a man does when something sacred happens in a kitchen. He wiped his hands on a rag and went outside with his mug, making a big show of studying the vines like they'd learned algebra since morning. Kana's eyes followed him for a second, then came back to mine. Those eyes, they've had my heart since the day they blinked up at me from a swaddle of hospital cotton, and said without words that I was a person who would be needed again. Sit, I told him, and we folded into our usual spots. Me at the head of the little table, him on the side with the chair that wobbles unless you tuck your foot under the rung just so. He did it without thinking. I love watching a child learn a house the way you learn a friend's laugh. Before you open it, he said, I got to say the words. I nodded. My kettle hissed and held its breath. Grandma, he said, and my name in his mouth was the clear bell of truth. I want you to know I'm not a little kid who only needs stuff. I need you. I like the way you listen to me like I'm not dumb. I like how you let me stir the chili even though I spill. I like that you tell me grandpa stories but also tell me the parts that were hard. 'Cause that's how I know being brave isn't being loud. His hands were shaking slightly. And I don't want you to say you're fine when you're not, 'cause when I say I can carry the groceries, I mean I want to be the one who gets to help you. So can I like for real? The words found me before tears did. A very practical part of my brain, long trained in casseroles, tire pressure, and receipts, stood up and surrendered the floor. I reached across the wood and put my hand over his. "You already honor," I said. It came out quiet but full like a church on Christmas Eve. He exhaled, then pushed the box closer. "Now open it." Inside the paper, under the string, was a shallow tin that used to hold mints. He'd cleaned it so well the embossed letters looked proud again. Inside that, on felt he must have cut from an old jewelry box, lay a small battered pocket knife. The bone handle had hairline cracks like spider webs frozen in first frost. Someone had carved initials in it long ago. Not mine, not his. I recognized them anyway. It was my husband's. He used to open envelopes with it at the end of the day, like each letter was a tiny ceremony. Where did you find this?" I asked. My voice did that thing where it comes up from somewhere old. "In the garage in that coffee can of doohickeys," he said, proud of himself for using the right technical term. "Mom said it was okay as long as it was not sharp and I don't carry it around. I cleaned it with that stinky stuff Mr. C uses on the banister." He reached into his jacket again, pulled out a folded scrap of wide-ruled paper, the kind his school uses because handwriting deserves its own runway. "And I wrote you something." He cleared his throat, looked down at the page, then up at me again twice like a swimmer coming up for air. "Dear Grandma," he began, and then he stopped reading and spoke it straight to me. "I am giving you this so you remember that you don't have to open everything alone." There it happened again, this small tilt of the world. Do you know that feeling when a sentence sits down at your table, and everything else scoots over to make room? I saw my husband at the workbench using that knife to pry open a paint can with more stubbornness than sense. I saw myself, 25, pretending not to notice his frustration so he could be the one to fix it. I saw myself 71 opening jars with knives when what I needed was so much to say, "Hand it here." And here was Con 10 and a half offering me a new grammar for the rest of my life. "I'd love it," I said, because love was the correct word. "And I love you, Con." He folded in the way boys do when they accept affection, like it might shatter if he handled it wrong. He put his forehead on the table and laughed, embarrassed by his own bigness of feeling. I put my hand on the back of his jacket and felt the science of growth under my palm. Men, like a man tuning his ears to the right station, drifted back in. "Everything all right in here?" "We're good," I said. And for once the word didn't mean don't fuss. It meant we are good. He saw the knife, saw my face, and nodded once. He has a veteran's respect for ceremonies he wasn't invited to, and he knows when a room has finished one. "You two want to test that porch step with some victory lemonade?" he asked. Con sprang up. "I'll get the lemons, Grandma. Can I slice?" "With supervision and a very bossy lecture about fingers," I said. We became 3 people around a small job, and the kitchen became what kitchens are for, the choreography of care. Kana's hands, careful now, cut rounds that were too thick and uneven and perfect. Min tightened the hinge on the screen door. I fetched the good glasses, the ones that ring when he thumb-med them. While the syrup cooled, I called my son to tell him about the knife. He didn't pick up, still at work, the time zones pulling at our voices like tide. I left a voicemail that started practical and fell into heart. "He brought me a gift," I said, and had to pause. But it was the words, "Honey, you're raising him right." I thought about the way my son sometimes apologizes for not coming by more. I thought about the lists we all make of things we should do and the lists that matter, which are much shorter. Who stood beside you when the hinge squealed? Who learned how your chair stops wobbling if you set your foot just so? We took our lemonade to the porch. The step still complained, but it held. We sat like 3 notes in a simple chord, and the quiet was the kind you get when something true has been said, and nobody wants to drop anything on it. Across the street, the Hendersons' flag lifted and fell. A dog barked twice and then remembered what it had been doing. Somewhere the radio announced a home run, and a roar of thousands became a small blue sound in our yard. "You know," I said, and Con clipped up from his glass with that urgent attention he reserves for weather reports and dessert. "There's a story about that knife." "Tell it," he said, and scooted closer so our shoulders touched. Min leaned back, eyes half closed, as if a good story is a kind of carpentry. "You let the wood tell you where to cut." I told him about a July when the car door wouldn't close and her grandpa pried a stubborn clip back into place with that very blade. About the day a letter came bad news and he opened it carefully because even bad news deserved to be handled with respect. About how I learned that love is less handing someone a bouquet and more standing next to them while they read something difficult. I like that, Khan said, tasting the idea. Standing next to them. We were quiet a while. The air went soft the way it does right before the sun decides to be a poem. I thought about the ways I've said I'm fine when the truth was I was carrying something heavy and noble and lonely. A house full of memory, an ache that doesn't always announce itself, a pride that keeps the world from seeing the smallnesses I've mistaken for weaknesses. Khan, I said, do you have a place at home for that letter you wrote me? Because I want to keep it, but I want you to make a copy and keep one too. Sometimes the person we write to is also ourselves. He considered that, as kids do, by staring at a tree until it gives them permission. Okay, he said. I'll make two, one for you and one for my desk. Min cleared his throat in the way of a man with a thought he's been fixing in his head until it fits. Lon, that backstep needs a new riser. It's an afternoon's work with the right lumber. I can bring what's needed Saturday, but only if you'll let me help without pretending I'm stealing your independence. I looked at the step, at the knife, at my grandson, at my hands, which have done so much and will still do plenty and which have earned the right to be held. I nodded. Saturday, I said. Bring the right lumber. And bring that old radio you like, the one with the crackle. You got it, he said, smiling into his glass. After he left and Kana's mom arrived to scoop him up, he ran back from the car to hug me around the middle like he could weld us together. I went back to the kitchen to wash the knife by hand. I dried it with the good towel, the one with the embroidered strawberries. Then I set it in the drawer by the stove, where I keep the things that make daily living gentler. Rubber bands, matches, the bottle opener shaped like a fish. It looked right there as if it had been waiting. I kept thinking of his sentence. I am giving you this so you remember that you don't have to open everything alone. It turned a light on in a hallway of my mind. I didn't know it was dark. People think the surprising part of growing older is the aches. It isn't. It's the way new kindness still catches you off guard. The way a child can tilt your mirror so you see the same face with less judgment. I made another cup of coffee I didn't need and stood at the sink the way women stand in kitchens when they are both finished and not finished. Through the window I could see the step, patient, and the spot where Min had set down the crate. I could see my reflection in the glass, hair pinned back the way it's been since the year. The good bobby pins stopped being made. Eyes that will never be my mother's but sometimes in the dishes shine are. If you're watching this from a city where the freight trains speak after midnight, you know the sound of something heavy moving the way it hums through your walls. That's how it felt in me then. Something I've been hauling alone suddenly hitched to another engine. The load didn't vanish. It simply changed hands just enough to make room for breathing. Later, after the house settled into the long sigh of evening, I pulled out the folded paper again and read his line out loud. The words felt good in the room. They belonged with the chair that wobbles unless you know how to sit in it. They belonged with the step that would be replaced Saturday. They belonged with the radio and the game and the lemon slices floating like thin suns in melting ice. The gift was small. The gift was not small at all. And I realized there was something I needed to do next. Something I'd put off because I didn't want to ask, didn't want to be a bother, didn't want to admit I was afraid. I turned the idea over like a coin. Felt its weight, felt its edges. I could almost hear Kana's voice in my kitchen again. Steady in that way kids get when they know they've told the truth. I set the knife on the counter, reached for the phone, and dialed a number I hadn't called in too long, ready to open what waited on the other side with the knowledge that my hands, while capable, were no longer alone. The next morning, the light broke soft over the curtains, and I felt different in my bones before my feet even touched the floor. It was as if those 12 words Khan had given me had unlatched a window inside me, letting air move in places that had been closed for years. I held on to the knife he left me, not for its edge but for its story, and I promised myself I'd use it as a reminder. No more I'm fine when I wasn't. I made coffee and stepped out onto the porch, the steps still waiting for Min's Saturday promise. The street was quiet, neighbors' sprinklers whispering across lawns, the kind of morning where even the sparrows sound thoughtful. I thought about calling my son again, telling him in fuller words what last night had meant. But then I realized something. This wasn't just about Khan. This was about me being ready to live differently, To let people carry part of me when I grew tired of lifting everything alone. Min arrived sooner than expected. Toolbox in one hand, that old crackly radio under his arm. Figured we'd start before the sun decides to show off. He said he wasn't just talking about the step. He looked at me at the coffee already poured and waited for me to say the thing I'd swallowed 100 times before. And for the first time in too long I didn't pretend. Min, I said, steady but not guarded. I'd like the help. Not because I can't, but because I don't want to do it alone anymore. He nodded the way men do when they've been carrying the same unsaid truth and set the toolbox down. As the boards came up and new ones went in, the radio murmured old songs, Kana's words still humming louder in my chest. I found myself telling Min stories I hadn't told anyone about the hard winters, about my late husband's laugh, about the weight of keeping things together when no one else noticed. And he didn't fix me with advice. He just listened, hammer in hand, steady as the boards beneath us. By the time Khan returned that afternoon, sticky with juice from the neighbor's peach tree, the step was sound, the porch steady, and something inside me had shifted as surely as wood against nails. He bounded up, stomped on the new riser and announced, "Perfect." Then, as if the whole project had been his idea, he pressed another folded paper into my hand. "This one's for today, Grandma," he said. I unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was crooked, the words simple, but they landed with the same unshakable weight. "You don't have to be strong all the time to be my hero." The porch fell quiet again, except for the song on the radio and the sound of our breathing. I held that paper, held his gaze, and for the first time in decades, I felt what it was to truly rest inside someone else's love without apology. I knew then that gifts don't always come wrapped in paper or tied with string. Sometimes they come as permission. Permission to set down the heavy jar. Permission to open the envelope slowly. Permission to say out loud that even heroes get tired. And in the small kitchen of my life, on a porch that finally held steady, I accepted it. Because sometimes the words of a child can build more than steps. They can build a whole new way forward.